Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm Terry Kreider. I'm going to be your host today, and I have a beautiful family sitting with me. I have Sandy Kelly, her mom, Marilyn Struthers, and we have thank you, Andrew and Timothy. And Timothy is 6, and Andrew is 9. Oh, I did good. I did good. And they're homeschooled. They're with the Lookout Mountain Homeschool Group, which is a group of homeschoolers that get together and you do field trips together and I guess furthering education things and fellowships and all. They're your helpers, right?
Right.
Now talk to me about homeschooling, because there are some pros and there are some cons, and I'm sure that there are families who would fit into like a profile of people who might feel like homeschooling is their thing. So can you talk to me about that?
Okay. Well, I used to be a public school teacher for several years.
All right.
And then I was a Christian school teacher for several years.
Okay.
And then I had child number 1 and stayed home. 3 years later, I had Timothy.
Child number 2.
Child number 2. And I just decided that I had wanted to homeschool. Having been in the classroom, I saw how difficult it is to have, you know, the 20 or 30 kids and one teacher.
Yes.
And I wanted them to have a little better ratio. I also wanted to be able to pick which curriculums I used, what books I wanted them to read, and something even as simple as vacations.
Oh, yeah.
When my in-laws come in from Pennsylvania, we can say, hey, we're declaring this week spring break. No, it's not the same as Walker County, but Grandma and Grandpa are here. We're going to have fun.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Right.
That's wonderful. And you know, you're a teacher, so it was very easy for you to pick up and teach. What about parents who haven't had that education? And you know, I've always thought about me. I thought, ooh, that would be a real intimidating experience for me, because I don't know that I've walked with my grandkids through some of the elementary school days, and I think, oh my gosh, I don't know that I could teach this, even in, you know, in math, because they're so far advanced compared to when I went to school.
Right.
You know, the dinosaur ages. So things have changed.
Yeah. Well, I remember even when I was a 4th grade teacher, the kids were shocked one day to find out that Mrs. Keller doesn't know everything. I'm like,
my goodness.
No, Mrs. Keller doesn't know everything. I just know how to learn and how to teach you. And so some of this I'm learning along with you.
Okay.
And so that helps. I've also found a website that I really like called simplycharlottemason.com. And she has a free curriculum guide which gives you suggestions for what to use for every subject and suggests different curriculums to use. And I find that very helpful, because instead of having to buy everything in a box, I can pick, I want this for math and this for history, this for science, and just kind of.
That's awesome.
I say she gives you the framework of the house, yet allows you the privilege of interior design.
Oh, that's great. So therefore you have more of a say-so into what kind of curriculum your children are going to learn.
Right.
That's great. That's great. Now, the state, I'm sure, has certain guidelines that you have to follow?
We actually just have to turn in an attendance record once a month, along with a, they call it a declaration of intent, just before the school year.
Okay.
To show that you're doing that, you have to take their standardized test once every 3 years.
Okay.
And we've just finished one with Andrew, and he came out really well.
I bet he did.
Did fine, so I think
bet
we're
he
on.
did. You
we're
did
on
good.
task.
You did good. Now, I think that's, you know, there's so much insecurity, I think, in the community. Some people are very pro homeschool. Some people are very against homeschool. They say, you know, there's no socialization, that school's more than just education. There's socialization. And so talk to me about that.
We laugh about that because socialization, where sometimes you get so busy with all these fun things to do, you got to make sure you have your school time.
Right.
I mean, you know, usually 4 days a week we're seriously doing school at home. The 5th day we go to a homeschool co-op, and we teach different subjects, and then we sometimes will go on field trips or have parties, and that's kind of our get together with others and learn day. And of course, there's lots of field trips and socialization. I'm with each of my children all day long.
There's lots of socialization.
Oh yeah, lots of corrective socialization too. And when they're with friends, I can see what they're doing. So they get to have mom saying, you know, was that very kind? Would you like someone to treat you that way? Whereas I wouldn't see that if I wasn't with them.
Well, and if you were a teacher in a public school, there would be certain guidelines that you could go by. You couldn't necessarily correct the way you wanted to correct, and you couldn't verbally correct the way you want to correct, you know, by teaching certain biblical principles, et cetera, et cetera. And so it gives you some great stuff. Now, you brought some wonderful things that the kids have done.
Yep.
You want to tell us about those?
Sure. Well, I guess we'll start with the cards. I like to try to take advantage of things they're interested in. I follow a pretty serious curriculum, but I also like to try to take advantage of some of the things. They've really gotten into photography lately.
It's called being well-rounded, right?
Yes, and so they've made up some greeting cards. My parents have a greeting card business, and we're looking at trying to get some a little professionally printed.
Look at these. They're wonderful. And you boys took all those pictures yourself.
I took this pile and Timothy took that pile.
Oh,
and this pile, Andrew is a little bit more advanced in the computer learning than Timothy. But Andrew has actually set up, put the pictures on here and the writing and done the whole layout himself. Timothy has yet to learn that when his mother has a chance to teach him.
That's right, Timothy. I don't know how either, so you're doing good. You're doing very good.
I'm a techno geek.
You're a techno geek too. You're right.
I love it. Now tell me about the books.
These were part of a contest for, you want to hold yours up, Timothy, for PBS Kids TV station where you had to write a story and either draw or take pictures. And we have fairly recently added a dog to our family. And so Andrew's written a story about how we got the dog, and Timothy's written a story about what they do with the dog.
And they are very good. I've already read them.
And all of his paw prints.
That's right, and all of his paw prints. It's wonderful.
Right.
And then
you're not going to read it all.
You've had some real special teaching moments. You called it something specific.
A teachable moment.
A teachable moment. Talk to me about teachable moments.
Right. Well, my mom comes almost every Tuesday, and we have Grammy Day. Oh. And she was here one Grammy Day when we were doing a science experiment, an extended experiment. We had ordered the caterpillar to butterfly kit from Insect Lore, and the science experiment was able to be shown to Grammy, and Grammy took advantage of that and actually published a book.
Talk to me just a little bit about that. I know we're going to have you back to really talk about your book, but give me a little bit of how this came about.
Well, actually, I had finished reading Charlotte's Web to the kids because I help Sandy, as I say sometimes, and so I was thinking about death. I cried through the end of that with my boys, the same as I cried through it when I read it to Sandy. And then the following week, Sandy had this, a couple weeks later, this butterfly thing, and I just saw it. I also know that my grandkids have my parents, great-grandparents in their late 80s, and I just thought, you know, I can't stand to think of them losing my parents because they love them, and I thought I want to give my kids hope in the face of death. And when I saw this little butterfly experiment, I just saw it as such a wonderful moment to teach my kids, my grandkids, a lesson. And then later on that same day, a real life event occurred, and I wrote out the story as it happened, just as it happened. And then different people encouraged me, you have got to get that written into a children's book.
I've said for years she should write a children's book.
Wow.
She finally obeyed.
She finally obeyed. It's about time, Mom.
The trouble is I'm not computer literate, so I had a lot of help from a husband who's very computer literate, but I had to take the original story and try to turn it into a children's story. And so I worked on that for a while and came up with my book. And I tell people it was such a true story that I told the illustrator, I want the pictures to look like the real people. So the grandchildren in the book are actually
your grandbabies.
My grandsons.
Oh, and how cool is that?
Even the Grammy looks like me. So
that is so cool.
That's me.
That's you. That's right.
That's right. So
that's so cool.
That was a wonderful teachable moment that I felt not only taught my boys what death means so that they can learn ahead of time, but it also gives them the language and the words when we talk about it. And I guess Andrew was 6 at the time of the book writing, and then Timothy was 3, and they've both really enjoyed the book.
That's so cool.
And you're my age right now.
That's right. That's right.
And it's such a hopeful book, too.
Yes.
It gives hope and
and encouragement.
Right.
Talk about some other teachable moments that you've encountered with your children.
Oh, lots of times we can, as we're studying history, sometimes they'll hear about the false gods, and so it gives us a chance to talk about that and how, it's really sad how these people believed in gods that were statues that they can't hear, they can't see, they can't do anything. Why would we want to trust something like that when we can trust our God?
Exactly.
So
I agree, sir.
Sure on that. Also gardening. We have a nice little garden in our backyard, and so it's teachable to actually be taking care of these things, be responsible. They've actually helped me turn cucumbers into pickles and tomatoes into salsa.
And of course, to do that tomorrow.
Yeah, we got some pickles to make
I'm going to come to your house tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right.
Cucumbers and big ones.
There, big ones.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yes.
Well, so what you're telling me is that homeschool gives, it's not just cut and dried curriculum. I mean, they get the cut and dried curriculum, but they get so much more that it makes them so much more of a well-rounded person.
Right.
That they get life experience and they get practical experience, and all of those things make them who they become, right?
Right.
Makes you grow up to be good moms and dads, right?
Right.
That's right. So if you were speaking to the people who are listening today, and they say, I don't even know where to begin. If I want to homeschool, where do I even begin?
Okay. One of the things I would say is, I hate to admit this, but I've heard it said that sometimes the people who aren't the teachers do a better job than those who actually are the teacher.
Wow.
Because as teachers, we kind of have to learn how to teach at home and realize that things are a little different. We only have 2 kids, when we don't have to do 5,000 of the same problem just because they're in the book. If the kid understands them, at 5 of them, we can just stop and move on to something else. So I've had to do a little relearning myself. The biggest thing I would say is that simplycharlottemason.com teaches you all the different methods of homeschooling, gives you a whole big way to start. It really, really helps out. But I say keep in mind, it is a full-time job. It really is. My biggest frustration with homeschooling is just lack of time. There's so many good things out there, so many things I want to expose them to, books to read. It's hard to find time to do that. And then when I put so much into that, I'm like, oh, it's 5 o'clock and it's dinner time. Where's my cook?
Are you
Yeah, he'd like to be a cook.
All right.
I love to cook.
Like I said, I'm coming to your house.
So it is a full-time job. You have to be committed to it. It's, you don't get much time alone, so you have to be ready for that. Get a Grammy to come once a week, help out.
There you go. Thank you, Grammy. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
But it is rewarding, too, and so you kind of have to keep that in mind that, you're glad you're doing what you're doing.
And then if I want to find an association to hook up with, or a group to hook up with, like you have with the Lookout Mountain group, how do I find those homeschool groups?
Just Google them or look on Yahoo, or find somebody. Surely there's somebody in your church that homeschools or knows somebody that homeschools, and you can just kind of talk with them and see what they have to recommend.
So tell me again the website.
The website that I really like is simplycharlottemason.com.
simplycharlottemason.com. Well, I want to thank you, Sandy and Marilyn.
Thank you.
And Andrew and Timothy, sir. Thank you for being with us today and telling everybody what a wonderful experience it is to be homeschooled.
Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
My name is Ben Vereen.
My name is Beth Kitzinger.
My name is Wayne Curry.
My name is Jerry Beauchamp.
I have type 2 diabetes.
I have type 1 diabetes.
I have type 2 diabetes.
I have type 2 diabetes.
It doesn't hold me back.
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 Nearly 26 million people are living with diabetes in this country, including an estimated 7 million who remain undiagnosed. With the right diet, exercise, and medication, people living with diabetes can gain control of their blood sugar. If you or someone you love has diabetes, talk to your doctor. And visit standfordiabetes.org to participate in the movement for better blood sugar control. And take a stand for diabetes. That's standfordiabetes.org. If you have diabetes, it doesn't have to hold you back.
Don't let it hold you back.
It is a great day, and this is Joy in Our Town. I am your host today, Sean Teal, and I am excited that you are with us. We're going to be discussing today family life and especially bringing honor back to the families. We have with us counselor and writer, Miss Tabby Upton, and she's sharing with us today how honor can really work in a family to all of our advantage. Let's talk some more about it. Good to see you today, Tabby.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Tell me, how did you get to the point of being interested in this kind of level of family issues? Because we don't hear a lot about honor. We hear a lot about, domestic abuse. We hear a lot about, the parenting skills that are needed. But this particular area of really reestablishing honor in the family, particularly from children to their parents, how did you get to this point of that being such an emphasis?
Well, obviously, as a counselor, I talk to lots of people about many different issues in their lives, and one of the issues that seemed to keep coming up was this issue of pain from parents, or unforgiveness, or I really don't want a relationship with them anymore, or they were never there for me, and even them feeling anxious about, oh my goodness, I don't want to be like my mother, I don't want to be like my father, and I see traits of them in me and despising those traits. And so I was really just thinking about, how does one obey that commandment? Those who follow the precepts of Christianity, how do we keep that commandment of honoring our father and our mother in a world where families have really taken a hit, where fathers are often absent, where there's not as much respect for parents because parents sometimes aren't doing the greatest job of loving their children, and how that affects us. And the bottom line is that it really does affect us. It can cause our lives to be changed when we don't honor. It can cause our own children's lives to reap negative consequences when we don't honor our parents, and yet it's very difficult.
Right. Let's talk about some of the unintended consequences that come with dishonor in a family. Again, we don't think too much about that being a dysfunction.
Yes.
But it is, because dishonor literally undermines the fabric of any relationship.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who it is, but particularly such an essential relationship between parents and children. So what are some of the unintended consequences that you're seeing in children, and maybe even adult children?
Yes.
Who have dealt with that in the past?
Yes. Well, one of the consequences is a lack of honor and respect for people outside the family.
Right.
We see that in schools, where children don't honor teachers, or have a very difficult time with authority figures in general. We see that sometimes, we call it in certain counseling circles, inner vows, where we say, I'll never be like them, but it's attached to bitterness and unforgiveness. And so you literally become the very thing you don't want to become.
Now, let's talk about that, please, because that's a phenomenon for me. It's like a psychological phenomenon.
Yes.
Because there's something negative that you are repulsed by.
Yes. And hurt and deeply wounded by.
Deeply wounded by,
perhaps.
And yet you wind up being attracted to that's not Stockholm Syndrome kind of thing. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You like, you kind of love your captors, you wind up wanting to, help your kidnappers. Is it kind of like that? That kind of...
I think it's even deeper than that, because that's part of a trauma, maybe bond in some ways. You're conscious while that's happening. I think this issue of becoming like your parent, or becoming like the negative aspects, because as you say, I don't want to become that way.
Is that where the attention is? So the attention becomes, I don't want to be like this, but that's a negative.
And the focus is on that negative, and it's lodged in bitterness and unforgiveness. And so you reap that. How the scripture says we reap what we sow. We're sowing in unforgiveness and bitterness and anger. We're sowing in the soil of bitterness.
We're sowing in that.
And then we reap that. And also judgment. It says, judge not lest you be judged. Measure for measure, the same way you're judging. So if I judge you, and it's not my place, and I judge you because you did, such and such, then I reap the consequences of being judged for that very thing, which means I did I did or will do that very thing,
Right.
possibly.
Now, as a counselor, that's a pretty spiritual principle, what you just described.
Yes, yes.
Are you able in counseling to apply these kind of principles in family life, particularly in this area of dishonor?
You know how I apply Christian principles to people who may not be Christians? I simply say, this sometimes happens. I may not say, well, in Scripture it says this, or you know, God said this, but you know, hey, sometimes when we say something with bitterness and anger, we actually become the very thing we don't want to become. So that I just apply the principle, not always labeling it.
Okay. When you have someone who you're counseling and they're working through maybe growing up in a home where there was a lack of honor, where do you start with that person? I mean, what do you need them to kind of begin to process and work through?
Well, the first place is just telling the truth to ourselves, telling the truth to someone else. That there's freedom in speaking the truth and acknowledging the hurt and the pain. So sometimes we might write mock letters to someone who hurt us or a parent who hurt us. Or sometimes I'll just say, tell me the story, so they can just express it. And then I talk about very softly how forgiveness can sometimes free you, and that if you are not able to do that today, just be thinking about that for your future and how that can help you move forward.
Okay. So it really starts with the truth telling.
The truth telling, so important. And so people can feel that their pain is acknowledged and validated, you know.
How do you empower truth tellers at a home, though? Because when there is a lot of dishonor, a lot of abuse, it seems like denial, projections, justifications, a lot of defense mechanisms are being used.
Yes.
So how do you empower, you know, how do you find the truth teller in the house? You know what I'm saying?
That's true. Because there's my truth, your truth, and the real truth. Yes, for sure.
So how do you address that? I mean, you just have to work it, talk it out. How do you as a counselor deal with
Well,
that?
if I'm dealing with the whole family, we talk about perspectives. You know, this person has this perspective, this person has a different perspective. Let's just deal with perspectives. We can't all go back in time and find out exactly what happened. Respect their feeling and their interpretation of what happened. If I'm dealing with an individual, you know, I just talk about what happened to you, and then what did you do in response to that? Was that a healthy response to that? Was that positive, negative, you know, so that they can take responsibility for their responses,
So
which also affect.
When they're coming into adolescence, children being raised under parents, and let's say specifically these might be Christian parents. Okay, so they have this whole ethos in the house on these biblical principles. The 10 Commandments are in operation, and you know that whole thing going on. When a teenager comes to a point where a teenager says, I have to have mutual respect. How do you deal with that when in the biblical frame, those of us who are well churched, we don't know anything about mutual respect with children? Because biblically we don't have really a frame of reference for that. Even though the Bible teaches us to mutually submit one to another. When we read that, we are not thinking that has any application between me and my child, you know what I'm saying? So, but you know this because you're a counselor and a writer, that when adolescents, teenagers, they come to a place, and I don't even know when it happens, but I have a teenager now, but it comes to a place where all of a sudden they want this mutual kind of respect. And if, again, you're growing up with a biblical worldview, what is that? For those of us who go to church, would you help us with that? Because I don't know how effective we are doing with that, because we're using patriarchal biblical models. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you better do what I say do. What are you talking about? You better respect me. You know what I'm saying? That's the point. So what is that? I mean, at least
I think we have to. Can you? Sure. I think what parents need to realize is that their parenting does have to change as the child develops and changes. So you may, if you believe in spanking, you may spank a 5-year-old, but I wouldn't recommend spanking a 14-year-old. Okay? So you may need to ground the 14-year-old and talk through healthy choices, but you don't talk through all that with a 5-year-old. You just give a negative consequence so they remember that and stop doing it. So I think understanding that developmentally a teenager, look at them as half child, half adult. And you want to model respect to them.